It took me over 30 years to write this letter, and if it has found its way into your hands, then I suppose it means I've finally stopped running from the truth. Or maybe I've simply run out of time. I watched you grow up from a distance, year after year, like a ghost standing just beyond the edge of the picture. I watched you walk through the same town square where your mother and I once shared coffee and quiet laughter. I watched you wobble down Sycamore Street on your first bike, your little helmet slipping over your brow, your knees scraped, but your spirit never wavering. I saw you the day you enlisted, standing outside the recruitment center in Wilkes Barre, with that same stillness in your face that I remember from my own reflection 60 years ago, on the eve of war. But I never came to you. Never waved, never said your name. Why? Fear, cowardice, love, yes, love. Now that time is no longer on my side, and my body has begun to betray me the way memory once did, I need to explain what you never knew, and why I could never say it until now. You grew up never knowing me, and yet I knew you better than you can imagine. I knew the way your left eye squints when you're deep in thought. I knew your laugh before I ever heard it. I knew that you held the world at arm's length, just like I always did. Not out of arrogance, but out of armor. There are things I've carried through life, heavier than any rifle. And this truth, you, have been the heaviest of all. So here it is. My truth. The only gift I have left to give. If this story touches you the way it's lived inside me all these years, then I ask only this. If this story touches you the way it touched me while writing it, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us keep sharing stories that move, inspire, and surprise. And now, prepare yourself, because what comes next will change everything. Her name was Eleanor. And even now, after all these years, it's the one name I can't say without feeling a quiet ache beneath my ribs. The kind of ache that memory plants deep, like a root that never stops growing, no matter how far from the past you think you've wandered. I met her in the summer of 1941, just a few months before everything changed. Before the newspapers shouted headlines in black ink that sent boys like me across oceans and into fire, before the sky in our little town seemed permanently overcast with worry and expectation. She worked at her aunt's shop on the corner of Chestnut and Pine, a quiet place with creaky floorboards, jars of penny candy, and the kind of stillness that made time feel suspended. I walked in for a bottle of Coke and walked out with her name echoing in my mind for days. She wasn't like the other girls in town, the ones who painted their nails bright red and talked about Hollywood or California dreams. Eleanor had an old soul wrapped in a soft laugh, with eyes that didn't look at you, but through you, like she was searching for something in the way you held your shoulders, the way you paused between words. Her hair was chestnut brown and always pulled back in a loose braid that fell over her shoulder like it had a mind of its own. And when she smiled, it felt like the world paused, just long enough for you to remember what it meant to be still. There was no moment of thunder, no dramatic beginning, just two people standing in a quiet shop, the radio humming low in the background, and something invisible shifting in the space between them. We started walking together after that. Sometimes in the late evenings, when the sun dipped behind the hills and the streets glowed amber, sometimes early mornings with the fog still clinging to the trees near the river. She'd bring coffee in a thermos, always black, and I'd bring stories from the base where I was stationed. Half of them exaggerated, most of them softened to spare her from the reality we both knew was creeping closer. She never asked about the war unless it was quiet, a glance, a touch on the wrist, a change in the air. And I never spoke of it unless I could frame it in a way that sounded survivable. I didn't fall in love with her all at once. It came slowly, like the way dusk settles over a field, almost unnoticeable until you're standing in the middle of it, surrounded by something you didn't see coming. It was in the way she read books with her finger tracing the lines, in the way she hummed when nervous, in the way she always asked about my mother, even though I told her she passed years before. She saw things in me I didn't know were still there. Softness, decency, the belief that I might come back whole. She made me feel like more than just a soldier waiting for orders. With her, I was just a man. And for a boy raised by silence and discipline, that feeling was more foreign than anything I would face overseas. We spent nearly every day together that fall. I still remember the first time we danced awkwardly on the porch behind her aunt's store, a song playing on a neighbor's radio, not really dancing, just swaying in time with a melody neither of us remembered the words to. Her cheek rested against my shoulder, her fingers curled lightly around mine, and in that moment I imagined a future I had never dared to want. A little house, maybe 2 kids, a dog, late-night coffee on the porch in the winter. All of it impossible, and all of it suddenly so real. But wars don't wait for dreams. The notice came in November. I was shipping out to Europe with the 28th Infantry. I didn't sleep the night before I left. Neither did she. We sat on the floor of her room, the lights off, the quiet between us louder than anything we'd ever said. She didn't cry, not then. She just looked at me with this kind of knowing that still haunts me and said, "Don't promise me anything you can't keep." But I did. I promised I'd come back. I promised we'd build that life. I promised her everything, because in that moment not promising felt like betrayal, even if I knew deep down the world rarely lets us keep the things we love. That night we were reckless, or maybe we were hopeful. We reached for each other like people trying to etch something permanent into a world that erases too easily. And in that small, borrowed space of warmth with war knocking at the door, we created something more than memory. I left the next morning before sunrise. I kissed her forehead and told her I'd write. I walked down Maple Avenue with my duffel slung over my shoulder and my heart still beating in her room. What I didn't know, what she couldn't yet tell me, was that she was already carrying more than just my letters and the hope I might return. She was carrying you. War doesn't unfold in chapters, and it doesn't honor the promises you made under porch lights or the names you whispered in the dark. It's not cinematic, not even noble, just noise and cold and the endless sound of boots on unfamiliar ground. And the worst part is not the killing or the dying, but the waiting and the not knowing, the months that stretch into years, the letters that never arrive, the days you forget your own birthday, but remember the tilt of someone's smile who might not even be alive anymore. I shipped out to Europe with the 28th Infantry in early 1942, and what followed was a blur of snow, mud, thunder, and bone-deep fear that settled into you like a second skin. I saw men go quiet after battle, not because they were brave, but because they had run out of words. I learned how to sleep in ditches, how to eat standing, how to bury a friend before dawn. I stopped believing in returns, not just mine, but anyone's. And yet, in the few quiet hours before movement orders, when the wind would settle and the sky would open just wide enough to see stars through smoke, I thought of her, of Eleanor, and the way her hand fit into mine like a prayer I never deserved to say out loud. I didn't know about you yet, but in some way, I think my soul did. There was a heaviness I carried that didn't come from the rifle or the cold. Something deeper, something pulling at the corners of my memory, reminding me that I'd left more than just a girl behind. I wrote when I could, letters scribbled in haste on army-issue paper, smudged with dirt and sweat and fear, addressed to Eleanor with no return address because we were always moving, always chasing or retreating. I sent them when we passed through towns that still had post offices and people, but I never received a single reply, not a word, not a name, not a whisper. At first, I blamed the war, the chaos, the bureaucracy, the distances, but after a while the silence felt like something else, like finality, like a door closed on the other side of the ocean. When the war ended in 45, I didn't feel joy. I felt hollow. We came home to parades and flags, to cheers and banners strung up on main streets that didn't look the same. But none of it mattered to me because I returned not to a home, but to a question, one that had no answer. I went back to our town in Pennsylvania, walked the same streets, stood outside the same shop where we met, but it wasn't hers anymore. The shelves were empty, the sign was faded, no one remembered her, or if they did, they said nothing. They said she'd left in 43, maybe earlier, that her aunt had passed and she'd moved somewhere downstate. No address, no forwarding contact, just stories, incomplete and unhelpful, like puzzle pieces from the wrong box. I knocked on doors. I asked around. I even posted a notice at the train station. Nothing came back. I was a ghost hunting a ghost. And then, in 1951, 5 years after I returned, I saw a boy in a photo. It was nothing formal. I was visiting an old army friend in Harrisburg, and we were flipping through a church bulletin, something his wife had picked up after Sunday service. There was a page of photos, the youth choir, a food drive, a summer baseball team, and there, standing in the back row, arms crossed like he didn't quite want to be there, was a boy with my eyes. Not like mine. Exactly mine. It hit me like shellfire, sudden and sickening. I asked my friend's wife where the photo came from. She said it was a local event, that the kids were from a church group on the east side of town. I went there the next day, didn't say a word to anyone, just sat on a bench outside the building and waited. Hours passed. Then I saw him. You. You couldn't have been older than 10. You were walking with a man, tall, broad, with hands like a laborer, and the kind of easy familiarity in his body that said, "I belong here." He put a hand on your shoulder, and you looked up and smiled like it was the most natural thing in the world. That's when I realized you had a father, or at least someone you believed was your father. And I was nothing more than a whisper in the wind. I could have spoken. I could have walked up, asked for directions, pretended to be someone else and found a way in. But your mother, Eleanor, she had made her choice, and maybe she had her reasons. Maybe she thought it was better to shield you from a man who came home half of what he was. Maybe she didn't want to explain how war rewrites people, turns boys into statues, men into memories. So I walked away. I went home. I sat in my chair that night and didn't sleep. I thought of the letters I had written, the ones I hadn't. I thought of what it meant to come home to a country that didn't feel like mine anymore, to streets that had changed their rhythm, to a world where the only person I wanted to see had disappeared. And in her place was you. Over time, I learned to make peace with being invisible, or at least I told myself I had, because it was the only way I could stay near you without tearing apart the fragile world that had already formed around you. A world that didn't have room for ghosts or confessions or late arrivals. I became part of the background, a face in a crowd, a passerby whose name no one remembered. The old man who sat on the park bench across from the playground, the stranger browsing tools at the hardware store where you worked summers, the quiet customer who never made eye contact but always came in on Sundays after church, when I knew you'd be there behind the counter, folding receipts and smiling politely at people who had no idea how lucky they were just to hear your voice. I never missed a birthday, not that you knew. I marked each one in silence, watching from across streets, behind the frame of my car window, or from the back pew in a church where I'd never been baptized, just so I could see you blow out candles, unwrap gifts, laugh with people who had the right to stand beside you. I saw you fall in love for the first time, a girl with red hair and too much confidence, who made you smile like your mother used to. I saw you get your first job, hold the door open for strangers, help a neighbor carry groceries to her porch, and every time I felt something in me stretch and ache. Pride and sorrow tangled so tightly I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. There were days I wanted to reach out, to say something, anything, to find a reason to step into your life, if only for a moment. Once, when you were maybe 17, you sat alone on a bench at the train station, your head down, a duffel bag by your side. I was on the opposite platform, the cold wind tearing through the space between us. You looked like I did at that age, unsure of where you were going, certain only that you had to move. I stood there, frozen, watching you, my hand tightening around the railing so hard my knuckles turned white. I almost called your name. Almost, but I didn't. Because I had no right to. Because you didn't know me, and worse, because I had never given you the chance to. I wrote letters, dozens, maybe hundreds, most of them unfinished, some lost in drawers, others burned during nights when I'd had too much to drink and the ache became too sharp to carry. I wrote about the things I couldn't say aloud, how you had your mother's smile, how your laugh made the world feel fair again, how every time I saw you stand up for someone else, I thought, he got that from me. I wrote about Eleanor, about how we met, about the night I left, about the promise I made and broke, and the life we never got to build, and I always ended the same way. If you ever read this, I'm sorry. And I love you, always have, always will. But I never sent a single one. I couldn't bear the idea that I might destroy the story you believed about yourself, about who your father was, who you were, just to give myself the relief of no longer carrying this secret. I told myself it was better this way, that you were safe, loved, whole, that you didn't need to know about a man broken by war, shaped by absence, shadowed by regret. Still, I watched. I always watched. The day you wore your uniform for the first time, that was the day I nearly collapsed under the weight of everything I'd never said. You looked so much like me, it was almost cruel. The posture, the jawline, the stare that didn't blink even when the world around you did. I stood across the street from the recruitment office, clutching the frame of a nearby lamppost, like it could hold me up, like maybe the iron would be strong enough to carry what I couldn't. I knew then that the war had claimed another generation, and that my silence had allowed it. I wanted to stop you. I wanted to run across the street, fall to my knees and tell you everything. That you didn't have to prove anything to anyone. That your blood had already carried enough battles for both of us. But I couldn't, because I had forfeited the right to protect you. I had abandoned the role long before I understood what it meant. So I did what I'd always done. I stood still, and I watched you walk away. There comes a time, somewhere between the soft ache in your knees and the sudden shortness of breath that surprises you while tying your shoes, when a man begins to understand that time is no longer his companion, but his shadow, always behind, always catching up, and always preparing to pass him by. That's where I am now. Each morning I wake, grateful and uncertain, grateful that I still have the strength to stand, to write this letter, to remember clearly the things I never had the courage to say, and uncertain if I'll have the chance to see another sunrise, if this day will be the one that slips quietly into the end. I'm not afraid of dying. I've stood too close to death too many times to give it that power. I've seen it arrive suddenly, rudely, without elegance, and sometimes, rarely, with mercy. What I fear is dying with this silence still clutched to my chest, like a weight I chose to carry for far too long. I fear that if I go without telling you the truth, then all the years I spent watching you, loving you from the outskirts of your life, will vanish like smoke, leaving nothing behind but a name on a stone that means nothing to anyone. So I write this, not to ask forgiveness. I know I have no right to it, but to give you something that belongs to you and always has. The truth. You are my son. I say it now out loud, though no one else can hear it. And I write it here with a trembling hand that has carried a rifle, patched wounds, held a dying friend's face, and now, finally, holds a pen with more fear than any of those things. You are my son. Not by law, not by name, not by any paper filed in some government office, but by blood, by breath, by a single night that never left my memory. Your mother never told you, maybe to protect you, maybe to protect herself, maybe because she believed I had died in the war, and in many ways, she wouldn't have been wrong. The man who left her that night in 1941 never came back whole. He came back with silence in his bones, ghosts behind his eyes, and shame etched deep into the lines of his face. And perhaps she saw that, and knew that keeping me a secret was the last gift she could give you. Or maybe she was simply tired of waiting, of hoping, of the heartbreak that comes when promises are broken by bullets and time. I don't know what you'll do with this letter. I don't know if you'll read it to the end. I don't know if when you reach this part you'll feel anger or grief or nothing at all. You have the right to all of it, to hate me, to reject this truth, or perhaps to carry it quietly like I carried you, not out of guilt, but out of love. Because if there's one thing I can promise you, with the few honest words I have left, it's this: I loved you. I loved you every single day, even when I didn't have the right to say it, even when I stood across the street instead of crossing it, even when I chose silence over truth, because I believed, wrongly, that silence was a kind of mercy. Now I know it wasn't. Now I know that truth is the only thing worth leaving behind. In my apartment, in a drawer beside my bed, there's a small wooden box. Inside, you'll find the letters I wrote but never sent, the photos I collected, newspaper clippings, a drawing from your school art show that I tore from a community board and kept for years, even after the ink began to fade. There's a postcard from the beach you visited with your church group when you were 13. I remember because I saw the bus leave. I was parked across the street. It's all there, every piece of you I could gather from a distance. A lifetime's worth of watching, preserved in paper and memory, waiting for the day I'd be brave enough to give it to you. I don't know if I'll be here when you come. Maybe I will. Maybe this letter will sit in a mailbox for weeks, months, and by the time it finds you, the chair where I sit now will be empty. But whether I am gone or not, you will know this. You were never alone. Not really. I was always there. Just not close enough to touch, just not strong enough to speak. But now, finally, I have. The uniform I wore once took nearly everything from me. My youth, my innocence, my laughter, my name, spoken in someone else's kitchen. But it never took my love for you. That love endured in silence, in shadows, in hidden glances from across streets you never knew I stood on. And though I never had the courage to place my hand on your shoulder or say the words you had every right to hear, I carried them with me through every year, like medals no one ever saw. I used to wonder what kind of man you would become, whether you would inherit my quietness or your mother's fire, whether you'd laugh like her, quick and unexpected, or carry the kind of stillness that came from growing up not knowing the weight of absence, not realizing there had always been someone there just outside the frame. And now I know you became the kind of man I would have been proud to raise. You became someone who stood tall without being loud, who offered help without waiting to be asked, who loved the world despite not always understanding it. You became what I never got to be. And maybe that, in the end, is the gift in all of this. I don't know if you'll come looking for me. I don't expect you to. I've lived long enough to understand that truth isn't a rope we pull people in with. It's something we offer and let go. So I offer this now, the only thing I have left, the truth. My truth. Your truth. Ours. You'll find everything you need in the old wooden box in the drawer beside my bed. Not just letters and photos, but pieces of a life lived in silence, a fatherhood lived in exile. Inside that box is every birthday I missed, every word I never spoke, every Sunday I watched you walk out of church and disappear down a sidewalk I never dared to follow. There's no map in there, no instructions, just fragments, paper memories. But maybe, if you want, they'll help you understand who I was and who you are. If one day you decide to find me, or whatever's left of me, ask for my name. It's Kaz Rylan. It's not in any phone book, but maybe someone in this small town still remembers. Maybe the house I once called mine still stands on the edge of Willow Creek, its porch sagging a little more each winter, its roof catching the last of the morning sun, just like Eleanor used to dream it would. And if I'm gone by the time you get there, That's okay too. You'll know at last that someone waited for you, not in expectation, but in love. We share true stories every day, stories that move, heal, and stay with you long after the screen goes dark. Thank you for staying until the end.